At 61, James Hetfield has begun speaking about something he avoided for most of his life. Not the stadiums. Not the platinum albums. Not the legacy of metal domination that made his band one of the biggest forces in music history. But about the man whose shadow has followed him for more than 4 decades. Because behind the thunder of guitars and the roar of crowds lies one of the most complicated relationships heavy metal has ever seen. A friendship that began with raw ambition, collapsed in chaos, and slowly turned into a rivalry that defined an entire generation of music. For years, fans believed the story was simple. A reckless guitarist joined a young band, caused too much trouble, and was eventually thrown out. That guitarist went on to form a rival band and spent decades attacking his former bandmates in interviews. But the truth has never been that simple. And now, after decades of silence, reflection, and personal battles, James Hetfield is opening up about what really happened between him and Dave Mustaine, and why the wounds from those early years never fully disappeared. To understand the story, you have to go back to the beginning. Back to 1981. Heavy metal was evolving, but something new was about to explode. A faster, heavier, more aggressive sound was emerging from the underground, and a few young musicians in California were determined to lead that revolution. James Hetfield and Lars Ulrich were 2 of those musicians. They were young, restless, and completely obsessed with music. What they were building didn't even have a clear identity yet. It was raw, chaotic, and fueled by pure ambition. But they needed something more. They needed a spark. And that spark arrived in the form of Dave Mustaine. From the moment Mustaine walked into the room, it was clear he was different. He didn't just play guitar. He attacked it. His riffs were sharp, aggressive, and unpredictable. He had a natural intensity that pushed everything around him to move faster and harder. For a band still trying to find its sound, Mustaine was gasoline on a fire. In those early days, the chemistry was explosive. Songs began forming quickly, riffs flying around rehearsal rooms as the band pushed itself harder with every session. Mustaine helped shape several of the band's earliest tracks, including riffs and structures that would eventually appear on songs like The Four Horsemen and Jump in the Fire. Those early Metallica rehearsals were chaotic, loud, and electric. The band wasn't just writing songs, they were inventing a new style of metal. But the same intensity that made Mustaine such a powerful musician also made him incredibly volatile. His temper was legendary even back then. Arguments erupted constantly. Drinking was heavy. And tensions inside the band grew more unpredictable with each passing month. James Hetfield has later admitted that those early years felt like living inside a pressure cooker. Everyone was young. Everyone was reckless. And no one really knew how to manage the growing chaos. The breaking point came in a moment that now feels almost symbolic. One day, Mustaine's dog damaged bassist Ron McGovney's car. What might have been a minor argument quickly exploded into something much bigger. Tempers flared. Voices were raised. Then fists started flying. For Hetfield and Ulrich, that moment confirmed something they had already been quietly discussing. Dave Mustaine's behavior was becoming impossible to control. They respected his talent. They knew how important he was to the band's sound. But they were also afraid the entire band might collapse if things continued the way they were. So they made a decision that would echo across the entire history of heavy metal. Just days before recording their debut album, they fired him. There was no dramatic meeting. No long discussion. Instead, Mustaine was placed on a Greyhound bus back to Los Angeles with his gear and the news that he was no longer part of the band he had helped build. For Dave Mustaine, the moment felt like betrayal. Years later, he would describe it as one of the most painful experiences of his life. He believed he had helped shape the band's identity, only to be discarded just as success was beginning to appear on the horizon. That kind of wound doesn't disappear. It transforms. During that long bus ride back to Los Angeles in 1983, Mustaine wasn't simply replaying the argument in his mind. He was making a promise to himself. If Metallica believed they could move forward without him, he would prove them wrong. He would build something stronger. Something louder. Something that would haunt them. And from that vow, Megadeth was born. Unlike most musicians starting a new band, Mustaine wasn't beginning from a place of optimism. He was beginning from anger. Every riff he wrote carried the weight of rejection. Every lyric seemed to push back against the band that had thrown him out. When Megadeth released their debut album, Killing Is My Business, and Business Is Good, in 1985, the message was unmistakable. This wasn't just another metal band. It was a challenge. The music was faster, more chaotic, and fiercely technical. Mustaine wanted the world to see that his talent hadn't disappeared with his departure from Metallica. One song in particular captured the rivalry perfectly. Mechanics. The track was essentially Mustaine's version of a song he had helped create in Metallica, later transformed into The Four Horsemen. His version was faster, more aggressive, and unmistakably personal. It was as if he were saying, "This was always mine." While Megadeth began building its reputation, Metallica was also evolving at an astonishing pace. With Kirk Hammett stepping in as lead guitarist, the band pushed forward with relentless focus. For James Hetfield, the departure of Mustaine forced him to step into a larger role. Not just as a rhythm guitarist but as the emotional center of the band. Their next album, Ride the Lightning, showed a dramatic leap forward. The songwriting was deeper. The structures more ambitious. The band was no longer just an underground thrash act. They were becoming something bigger. Yet even as Metallica grew, the shadow of Dave Mustaine remained. He mentioned them constantly in interviews. He criticized their music. He accused them of abandoning the raw spirit of thrash metal. And fans quickly turned the rivalry into a full-blown cultural battle. Metallica supporters celebrated the band's growth and mainstream success. Megadeth fans praised Mustaine's uncompromising intensity and technical brilliance. He mentioned them constantly in interviews. He criticized their music. He accused them of abandoning the raw spirit of thrash metal. And fans quickly turned the rivalry into a full-blown cultural battle. Metallica supporters celebrated the band's growth and mainstream success. Megadeth fans praised Mustaine's uncompromising intensity and technical brilliance. For years, the two camps argued endlessly about which band truly represented the soul of metal. Behind the scenes, James Hetfield rarely responded publicly. Instead of answering Mustaine's criticism with words, he focused on the music. Albums like Master of Puppets and Justice for All pushed Metallica into legendary territory. Their sound expanded, their songwriting matured, and their audience grew larger with every release. But silence doesn't always mean indifference. In later interviews, Hetfield admitted that he was always aware of Mustaine's presence in the metal world. Not just as a rival, but as a reminder of the band's past. For decades, the two men existed in parallel worlds. Both had built legendary bands. Both had reshaped heavy metal. But neither had ever truly confronted the emotional fallout of their split. Until one unexpected moment forced them to face it. In 2004, Metallica released a documentary called Some Kind of Monster. The film was intended to show the internal struggles the band faced while recording the album Saint Anger. It captured arguments, therapy sessions, and moments of deep vulnerability inside the band. But one scene shocked fans more than anything else. Dave Mustaine walked into the room. For the first time in more than 20 years, he and James Hetfield sat down face to face. What followed wasn't a dramatic shouting match. It was something far more uncomfortable. Mustaine spoke openly about how deeply the firing had affected him. He described feeling erased from the band's history, as if his early contributions had been forgotten. One moment in particular revealed just how much pain still lingered. "You never even said thank you," Mustaine told Hetfield. The words hung in the air. For decades, fans had viewed their rivalry as entertainment, a dramatic clash between two legendary musicians. But in that room it became something else entirely. It became personal. Hetfield didn't lash out. He didn't argue. Instead, he admitted something that surprised many viewers. He said the band had been trying to survive. Those early days were chaotic. Everyone was drinking heavily. Personalities were colliding constantly. Letting Mustaine go hadn't been about hatred. It had been about stability. But even as he explained it, there was a sense of regret in his voice. For both men, the conversation opened old wounds that had never truly healed. It didn't end with reconciliation. There were no hugs, no triumphant reunion. But something important had happened. For the first time, they had acknowledged the emotional truth behind the rivalry. Years later, another surprising development almost changed everything again. According to Dave Mustaine, there were discussions about collaborating on music once more. Not as members of the same band, but as musicians revisiting the songs they had written together decades earlier. The idea electrified fans. The original architects of thrash metal, finally reconnecting after 40 years. But once again history intervened. Mustaine brought up a subject that had haunted their relationship for decades. Publishing credits. He believed he had never been properly recognized for some of the early Metallica songs he helped write. And when that topic entered the conversation, everything stopped. The project quietly collapsed. In a later interview, Mustaine summarized the moment with a simple sentence. "Once I brought that up, it was over." James Hetfield never publicly argued with the claim. Instead, he offered a short response when asked about Mustaine. "I respect him," Hetfield said. "I respect what he's done. For some fans, that statement sounded distant. For others, it sounded like the closest thing to peace the two musicians might ever reach. Today, both bands stand as pillars of heavy metal history. Metallica became one of the biggest rock bands in the world, selling millions of albums and redefining the boundaries of the genre. Megadeth carved out its own legendary path, earning respect as one of the most technically ambitious and influential thrash bands ever formed. Looking back now, the rivalry feels less like a war, and more like a strange kind of partnership. Two musicians who pushed each other, sometimes through anger, sometimes through competition, to create music that changed an entire genre. And maybe that's the real story. Not a feud, not a betrayal, but a complicated relationship between two artists who helped ignite the same fire, then spent decades trying to outrun its flames. At 61, James Hetfield doesn't speak about Dave Mustaine with bitterness anymore. Instead, there's something else in his voice now. Perspective. Because time has a way of softening even the sharpest rivalries. And when history finally looks back on the story of Metallica and Megadeth, it won't just see a conflict. It will see the moment when two young musicians collided and accidentally helped create the sound of modern heavy metal.